Good evening, all. Today's discussion will center around the use of espionage and propaganda during wartime. Many know the volume of propaganda used by all sides during World War II and the following conflicts. As a transmission of news has become more accessible by the public, it has become easier for regimes and leaders alike to not only mislead but deceive the citizens as to facts surrounding the wars. And today we're going to discuss an earlier time frame. Espionage has been even more popularized through time by novels and movies, but it was a dangerous and deadly business then and now. Spies come in all shapes and sizes, but the most effective are the ones that are invisible. That's where propaganda comes into play. The ability to convince people that they see things that aren't there or don't see things that are is a real key in that business. Espionage, in another form, was related to the Zimmerman telegram, a game played by both sides during World War II. German intelligence sent a telegram to their foreign office in Mexico wishing Mexico to begin war with the United States for two reasons. The first was to occupy our forces and the other reduce the sale of our munitions to the British. The telegram was intercepted by a British spy agency and used in an attempt to further their own cause by allowing the U.S. to believe that Germany was our enemy and to have the U.S. join the war on the side of Britain, which was their main goal early on and through the end of the war. This worked to neither country's advantage, as the British continued attempts to draw the U.S. into the war, but with little success. At the outbreak of World War I, the neutral United States was profiting, making fortunes from sales of all forms of supply, not only Allied forces, but the Entente forces as well. And the British desperately wanted the U.S. to join the war on their side, but even more, just to stop the sale of munitions and food to Germany to facilitate their own cause. And there was much more espionage during these early days than the common person may know. This espionage was not just a German spy sneaking around the shadows trying to steal information on weapons, although there were incidents in this country that could provoke the wrath of the U.S. and brought the American forces and weapons to bear on Germany. One such incident is that at Black Tom Island, New Jersey. The variations of the story were great in 1916, and everybody was pointing fingers and blaming somebody. But the tales of German saboteurs were told after the initial shock of the explosion that destroyed up to 80 warehouse buildings and multiple vessels and even damaged part of Ellis Island from the explosion. This explosion was felt across 5 states, and early estimates, there were estimates in the $25 million range in the 1916, which today would be a lot greater. We can all understand. Well, Black Tom Island was a depot and port of the early 20th century, shipping everything imaginable to Europe for the war, but especially explosives and munitions. These explosives were the main contributor to the explosion, and the early estimates of damage were greatly underestimated. The initial response of the Americans was to arrest the men responsible for the security and the ones in charge of the terminal. These men were charged with manslaughter at the time, which seems fairly preposterous until you think of the current state of the world, people bringing libel suits against gun manufacturers for death at the hand of terrorists. Later, after complete investigation by the Bureau of Investigation, a precursor to the FBI, it was determined that German spies were responsible for the blast. This disaster was concluded as accidental at the time, but there were many who still believe the Germans were responsible, when in fact they were. The theory that would be reiterated in the 40s with the entrance of the U.S. into World War II, and the related articles provide background to the explosion, but also to the use of the explosion to incite hate toward the Germans during World War II. This incident was not the only attack on U.S. soil, but one of the most damaging. This is one incident that led President Wilson's justification of entry into World War I according to legislation, the new legislation in the Espionage and Sedition Acts of 1917 and 18. So we can see that the use of propaganda is not a new tool in the world of political arena and that of espionage, but has changed with the times and developed from the days of the media/newspapers of the World War I era to dropping of leaflets in Vietnam to the cyber attacks we see today. And in conclusion, we can see that propaganda has had more influence on war and people than the truth and experience ever will. This week's sources included an article from the Washington Post from 1916, which gave what they thought was proof of the explosion, and it was accidental this time. And then a second article of the New York Times from 1940, which had proof that the blast was mainly caused by German agents. Thank you all. Have a good evening.